Yeah, you have to go.
Oh. Okay. You're live. Wait, no one's on it though.
That's all right.
Okay, go ahead.
It's okay. Hello, St. Matt's peeps and the world beyond. This is Pastor Stephanie, and just wanted to say hello this Thursday afternoon. I hope the second week in Easter has been a meaningful one, that there's been a blessing for you in it in some way. I do know that there are a few people in our community who know that they have friends or family members who have died of the coronavirus this week, and so our hearts go out to you, and I'm just sending you God's love and comfort and the loss of those family members and friends. I do hope that for everyone that's still in the midst of this pandemic, you are experiencing God's presence, and in fact, I invite you to put something in the comments about something you've experienced this week that has been a gift, or where you've really sensed God's presence with you. Because this week, that's sort of what it's about. It's about recognizing God's presence. This Sunday, we get to read one of the greatest stories in Scripture. It's a resurrection story. It's a story of how Jesus comes to some of his disciples on the road to Emmaus. Emmaus is this little town. It's about 7.5 miles outside of Jerusalem. And two of Jesus' disciples are walking from Jerusalem to Emmaus after the crucifixion, and they're really, really sad. They all they know about is the crucifixion. They don't know really about the resurrection, and they are mourning as they're wandering, and they encounter this stranger they don't know or they don't recognize. And they start talking to him, and he hasn't a clue. He pretends to have no clue about the crucifixion. Of course, it's all rather ironic, because the person they're encountering and the presence that they're encountering is Jesus, but they don't recognize him until they sit down for a meal, and they literally break bread together. And so in honor of that story, I thought I'd do a little video for you about how I bake bread, specifically communion bread. And Zoe is filming right now, and Hannah is sitting in the kitchen because they love the bread, and they're actually waiting for it to come out of the oven so that they can eat the samples that we're making today. So I'm going to show you, and I'm also going to post the recipe for communion bread. But I just want to invite you to make this bread sometime this week or next week. Take some time during your quarantine, bake some bread, and emulate that experience of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus who experienced Jesus in gathering in a meal, eating the food. So how do I make bread? Well, the recipe I use is very, very simple. It starts with 2 cups of warm water, which you put in the bowl. I'm doing that. And the water has to be warm because it helps the yeast do its thing. Next, we have to put 2 tablespoons of honey. This honey has crystallized a little bit, so I have to open that way, and we'll put a couple of spoonfuls of crystallized honey in here. The honey is important because it provides the food for the yeast as it does its thing. So there's 1, and here's the 2nd tablespoon, if it'll come out of the bottle. There we go. All right, so that's the 2 tablespoons of honey mixed in the hot water. Now we'll sprinkle the yeast on top. So this recipe, one of the reasons why it's so tasty and yeasty is because it uses 2 packets of yeast. Many recipes only use 1, but I like this one. It also makes it go a little faster. So we sprinkle the yeast on top, the first and then the 2nd packet. And because the honey is in there and because the water is so warm, the yeast proofs really pretty quickly. So while that yeast is proofing, proofing is is where it gets all bubbly on top of the on the top of the water. While that's happening, I get my bowl, my mixing bowl ready. The recipe that I use calls for 3 cups of whole wheat flour and later 2 cups of white flour. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I couldn't find any whole wheat flour in the stores. So I'm making this particular batch with just the white flour. And because of that, I'm increasing the amount of the flour to 6 cups. So what I've done is I've put already 3 cups of flour in this bowl. And I'm gonna let this proof for 1 more minute. And then I'm going to pour, oh wait, no, I think I have to add something to that. Ah, yes. Into that yeast mixture, before I add it to the flour, I add 1/4 cup of olive oil. Nice and rich. That helps the bread stay moist. And then for flavoring in this bread, it's kind of interesting. It gets a teaspoon of vanilla, so a little bit of sweetness. But then it also gets 2 teaspoons of salt, and the salt's important because it actually helps with the rising of the bread, but it also, that combination of salt and vanilla, give it a particularly good flavor. At least a flavor that Zoe and Hannah really like. Zoe's smiling, by the way. All right, so there are the 2 teaspoons of salt, and I think that's everything that goes there. So now I'm just going to add this mixture into the mixer, which already has 3 cups of white flour. Because I'm using white flour, the dough is actually very soft. It's a little too soft, but it's what I have. So I'm using the ingredients that I have. All right. So now I'm going to turn this on. Turn it on low for a moment to let that blend, and I'm going to grab some more flour, and then I'm going to add another 3 cups. So let me grab a spatula so I can kind of carefully push some of that flour into the mixer. All right. All right, so I'm going to add the cups of flour. Now, normally with the flour, you want to add it 1 at a time and give it some time to blend. So I'm going to add 1. And let that blend. Don't want to turn it on too high or I'm going to make a big mess. I'm already making a mess in the kitchen. But that's it. That's half the fun. Alright, so there's 1. And I'm going to add 2 and 3. Again, normally I would add it a little bit more slowly, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and put it in and turn it on. So as your bread dough blends, you're kneading it. You can do it in a mixer. You could do it in a bowl with your hands. There are all different ways of kneading the bread. I use the mixer just because it's handy. And then once your dough is blended, what you're going to do is you're going to put your dough aside for about 30 minutes. You're going to cover it, put it aside for 30 minutes, and let it rise. I like to do it on top of our oven because the oven is preheating. So I'm going to take this down and take the kneaded dough. It needs to be kneaded a little bit more, but for the sake of demonstration, so I'll take that kneaded dough, I'll leave it in the bowl, I'll put the bowl on the stove, and then I'll take a piece of plastic. And I use plastic to cover the bowl because it's so warm on the stove. Otherwise, the dough will dry out. Except that now I messed up the plastic. There we go. Thank you, Zoe.
Yeah.
Oops, didn't do a very good job
No.
of that.
It's okay.
Oh, well. All right. So sometimes instead of plastic, I will use a clean kitchen towel. So I think I'll do that too. Oop, Zoe, are you eating the dough? Uh-oh. So Zoe and Hannah particularly like the flavor of the dough, and it is really delicious. So you let the dough sit for 30 minutes, and then you take it and you make little loaves with it. I usually divide it up into 4. You can see the dough is very soft because it's all white. If it was mixed with the whole wheat, it would be a little, it wouldn't be quite so gloopy and soft and spreading all over the place. You put it in put the bread aside. You could put it in a bread loaf pan if you wanted to. I like to make these little round ones. And then before I bake it, I take a knife and I make a little mark of the sign of the cross in my little breads. Let it rise again just a little bit so that it takes that form back, gets back into that little bread form. You let it rise for 30 minutes there, and then you put it in the oven and you bake it for 15 minutes. I put a loaf of, or one of the pans of bread dough into the oven, so I'm going to see if it's ready yet. Ooh, it is. So it's been in for 15 minutes. And here is our little loaf. I'm going to hold it up for everyone. Here is a sample loaf of communion bread. And one of these I'll use this Sunday when we celebrate communion. But I'm going to have to be fighting Hannah and Zoe, I think. I think this one is probably going to end up being their pre-dinner snack because I took over the kitchen to make the communion bread and we're a little behind on dinner. So I'm going to let them eat some bread while they wait for the chicken to be ready. But anyway, there is the communion bread. I'm going to post the recipe in just a moment. And yeah, I hope you all are doing well. I hope you have a great week. And I hope you experience God's presence in the meal that you share at home and the bread that you bake. Take care, and until the next time. Bye-bye.